Hi, I'm Sue, the creator of Couture and Couture kits, pre-cut linen sew-at-home garment making kits with easy-to-follow online instructions. My versatile Helen linen tunic has two possible versions, either with or without a collar. I would strongly suggest that if you're new to sewing clothes, then you follow video 1A, which is the no collar option. Attaching a collar is really quite difficult. If you're an intermediate sewer and maybe you have already attached sleeves into a sleeve head, then maybe you want to consider the collar option, but I would suggest that you watch both video 1A and video 1B before making a decision as to which one is for you. Both options are equally stylish, and if you choose to make the version without the collar, you can use the collar pieces to make a matching scrunchie. So this video 1A relates to the no collar option. Before we start, a few pre-production notes. Seam allowances are 1.5 centimetres unless otherwise advised. Use the magic marker pen where indicated to highlight notches or mark your fabric. It does fade in water or air, so don't worry, it's not going to stain the fabric. Your care label and brand label will dye to match the colour of your garment if you decide to garment dye. So if you're going to dye a dark colour, I suggest that you attach these after dyeing. As linen is a natural fabric, you will find natural slubs and flecks in the fabric. These are to be considered characteristic of the fabric and are not defects. And you have been supplied with a reel of natural cotton sewing thread. This will also dye to match your garment, so please do use this and not a standard also polyester sewing thread, which is a plastic origin and will not dye to match your garment. So if you do decide to garment dye, you would be left with white stitches if you used a polyester thread. Now we need to identify the pieces that you're going to use to create your Helen tunic without the collar. You will need the front and the back panels, the two cuff pieces, the front facing and the back facing. You do not need the two collar pieces, so you can put these to one side for now. You will of course need your sewing thread at this point, but not the two labels. Let's start by using your magic marker to highlight the notches. So the first image shows you where these notches are on the front and back panels. You will also find notches on the cuffs and on the facings. So at each notch, mark with your magic marker a 1 centimetre line into the garment so that these are clearly visible after overlocking or zigzagging. There's no right or wrong side to the fabric at this stage, so first of all, identify the front from the back panel. The front has got the V shape cut at the neck. Set your sewing machine to a straight stitch. You first need to stay stitch the curved neck edges. Stay stitching simply does as it says. It helps the fabric stay in place. Because your fabric is cut on a curve at the neck, some of the fabric runs across the bias, which is the 45-degree angle of the weave, and this has an area of stretch in it, and you need the fabric to stay square. So we use stay stitching to hold the fabric square. You need to stitch from the shoulder towards the centre of the neck on both the front and the back panels. Use a straight stitch to stitch just 5mm from the edge, as is shown in the second and the third pictures. The next job is to neaten the edges of your panels. So set your sewing machine to a wide zigzag stitch or prepare to use cotton thread on your overlocker. Neaten the edges by zigzagging the entire underarm and down the sides to the bottom of the panels and across the shoulder tops of both the front and the back. Then trim off any stray threads. Now take the front and the back panels and pin them together at the shoulders. Remember, there's no right or wrong side at this point. Sew a 1.5 centimetre seam along the shoulder. Remember to back stitch at the start and the finish to secure your stitching, and then press open with a 2-dot or medium heat iron. The next job is to attach the cuff to the sleeve edge. So open up your tunic onto a table with the right side facing up. Make sure that the edge of the sleeve is lying square, as in the second picture. The first picture shows how it may naturally lie on the table, but you need to get the edge of the sleeve parallel to the cuff. Lay a cuff on top of the sleeve edge, lining up the raw edges, and pin in place as is shown in the second diagram. Now stitch a 1.5 centimetre seam, back stitching at the start and the finish to attach the cuff to the sleeve edge. Grade the seam by trimming away half of the cuff seam allowance. Grading the seam allows for a gradual decrease in the thickness of the fabric at the seam. Now, using a medium heat iron, press the seam allowance towards the cuff. Linen can stand a higher heat, but it may slightly yellow if your iron's a little bit too hot. This should disappear after washing, but better to use a medium heat iron at this stage. Now we can move on to the front facing. You're not going to need to pay attention to the 2 notches on the front facing, only the ones on the back facing. On the front facing, mark a point 3 centimetres from the bottom of the facing and draw lines 1 centimetre parallel to the edge of the V opening that meet at that point. So just to reiterate, this video is relating to the linen tunic without the collar. The rest of the instructions refer only to the no collar version, so if you think at this stage you want to apply a collar, then you need to switch to video 1B. As you did with the bodice pieces, you first need to stay stitch the edges of the facing, so 5 millimeters from the edge, using a straight stitch, stitch from the edge towards the centre of both the back and the front facings. Next is to stitch the front to the back facing at the short shoulder edges, so lay one on top of the other, and remember there's no right or wrong side at this point. Pin them together and sew a 1.5 centimetre seam allowance, remembering to backstitch at the start and finish. These small seams then need pressing open with a medium heat iron. To attach the facing to the bodice, lay the bodice down on the table with the seams down to the table and the right side upwards. Place the right side of the facing onto the bodice neckline so that the seams of the facing are visible, and pin all the way around, matching the shoulder seams and matching the back notches. Now, following your pen lines, stitch down the V of the facing and very carefully all the way around the curved edge of the facing. Reinforce the corners of the facing either by stitching over the corner area again or by backstitching, and reinforce the V by stitching down to the point and back up again to create 2 lines of sewing, one on top of the other at the V point. This will strengthen this area because you're going to snip down to it in a second. Now grade this seam by trimming away half of the facing seam allowance and carefully snip down to the point of the V, being careful not to snip through your double line of stitches. Then trim off the corners of the facing as close to your stitching as you can. Clip all the way around the curved edge of the neckline, making sure that you don't snip through your sewing line. Turn the facing to the inside and very carefully push out the corners to get them nice and square with a closed pair of embroidery scissors or something similar, but push the corners gently so that you don't puncture that corner, and then use a medium heat iron to push the seam allowance towards the garment. Then press on the outside, making sure that the seam is right on the edge of the neckline. Finally, to finish off the neckline of your tunic, you're going to top stitch a line to hold the facing into place 2.5 centimetres from the edge. So using your magic marker, mark dots all the way around 2.5 centimeters from the seam edge and use a couple of pins to hold the facing into place, while you then follow these dots and top stitch all the way around the curved edge and the V opening and the bottom horizontal section of the V opening to secure your facing. At the top corner where the neck curve edge meets the top of the V, curve your top stitching slightly so that your sewing line flows around the corner. Trim off any loose threads and any frayed edges, and you're now ready to move on to the second Helen Tunic video. The second video, side seams, cuff and hem finishing, applies to both versions of the tunic, either with or without collar. So you'll find this on YouTube titled Helen Side Seams, Cuff and Hem Finishing.